Today, we're talking about a name you've probably heard whispered in conversations about incredible wealth, immense power, and maybe even a few conspiracy theories. We're talking about the Rothschilds.
So does one family secretly control the world? It's a huge question, right? And for centuries, it's been the fuel for all sorts of wild theories. You know, this idea of a shadowy group pulling all the strings behind the scenes. It's a pretty compelling thought. But I'm going to tell you, the truth, it's way more interesting.
Because when you dig into the actual history, the documented, real story of this family, what you find is a tale of strategic genius, just relentless ambition, and a historical impact that is honestly way more incredible than any myth you could make up.
And this whole story, it doesn't kick off in some fancy palace or a modern boardroom. No, it starts right here, in the crowded, walled-in Jewish ghetto of 18th century Frankfurt. We're talking about a place with severe restrictions, but also a place of incredible resilience.
And this is where we meet the founder, the man who literally drew up the blueprint for a global financial dynasty. Okay, so to really get the Rothschild story, you first have to understand the world they lived in, the rules they were forced to play by. You see, for Jewish people back then, in places like Frankfurt, so many doors were closed. Owning land, joining most trade guilds, just not allowed. So what did that leave? Well, it pushed many people into finance and trade. It was one of the only paths open for them to make a living and get ahead. It really wasn't a choice, it was born out of necessity. And out of that necessity steps Meyer Amschel Rothschild. He gets his start trading rare coins, building this amazing reputation for being honest and just really knowing his stuff. This gets him noticed, and pretty soon he becomes a court agent. Basically, a trusted financial manager for the local German nobility, including the super wealthy Elector of Hesse Castle. So by the time he passes away in 1812, he hadn't just built a solid bank. He had come up with a truly revolutionary plan for what came next.
And this is the moment the story explodes. It goes from a local success story to a truly global phenomenon. And it's all thanks to the founder's single most brilliant idea, his own sons.
You see, the Rothschild's secret sauce, their big innovation, it wasn't some newfangled financial product. It was a human network. Meyer got something that nobody else did at the time. In an age where information moved at a snail's pace and you couldn't trust what you heard, having your own private, fast, and totally reliable communication system across countries, that was the ultimate weapon.
So what did he do? He sent his 5 sons out to plant flags in the 5 most important financial hubs in Europe. Amschel's the oldest. He stayed home to run the original bank in Frankfurt. Nathan, he went to London. James set up shop in Paris. Solomon headed to Vienna, right in the heart of the Austrian Empire. And Karl, he took on Naples to manage things in Italy. This whole setup, which they symbolized with 5 arrows on their family crest, it wasn't just about getting bigger. It was about completely changing the game of international finance.
And man, did this network give them an edge. It was almost unfair. While their rivals were waiting around for the public mail to arrive, the Rothschilds had their own private system of couriers, ships, even carrier pigeons zipping information back and forth. Think about it. Nathan in London knew what was happening on the Paris markets before any other banker in London. This meant they could do something called arbitrage, basically buying low in one market and selling high in another, all because they had the news first. And if one of the banks ever got into trouble, the other brothers could send cash to bail them out, almost instantly.
So they've built this incredible machine. And now it was about to face the ultimate test. The biggest stage you can imagine, a war that engulfed the entire continent.
All right, a quick history refresh. We're talking about the Napoleonic Wars, which ran from about 1803 to 1815. This was a huge, sprawling series of conflicts with Napoleon's French Empire on one side and a coalition of other European powers on the other. And here's the key thing to remember. Wars are ridiculously expensive. Governments were absolutely desperate for money to pay their soldiers and buy supplies, which created this massive demand for financing. And you better believe the Rothschilds saw this as a massive opportunity. The London branch, led by the brilliant Nathan, became absolutely essential to the British war effort. He wasn't just lending them money. He set up this incredibly complex smuggling network to get physical gold across enemy lines to pay the Duke of Wellington's armies fighting Napoleon. Just look at this number. In 1815 alone, the family arranged loans for Britain's allies worth £9.8 million. In today's money, that's almost £1 billion. Just staggering.
Their success was so huge, so visible, that people started to see them as a new kind of power in the world. I mean, check out this quote from an American observer back in the 1830s. Now, it's definitely an exaggeration, but it tells you exactly how people saw them. They had gone from being bankers to wealthy nobles to being the bankers of entire nations. So the wars end. And what do the Rothschilds do? They pivot. They take all that capital they'd built up and they pour it into financing the next great revolution, the Industrial Revolution.
And the sheer scale of what they were involved in is just mind-boggling. They were issuing the government bonds that literally built nations, not just in Europe, but as far away as Brazil. They financed the massive railway projects that were stitching Europe together, like the big Chemin de Fer du Nord in France. There's that legendary story where the London branch loaned the British government millions of pounds on just a few hours' notice so they could buy a controlling stake in the Suez Canal, a vital waterway. They got into mining, funding huge companies like Rio Tinto for copper and De Beers for diamonds. And they even diversified into luxury goods, buying up world-famous vineyards like Chateau Lafite.
But their story isn't just about money. With that kind of wealth, it was inevitable that they would start playing a bigger role in social and political life too.
You have to remember, they came from the Frankfurt ghetto, and the family was deeply connected to the Jewish principle of tzedakah. It's this idea of a duty to social justice and charity. So as their fortunes skyrocketed, so did the scale of their philanthropy. We're talking hospitals, social housing projects, funding the arts all across Europe.
And their social impact was huge. For example, Lionel de Rothschild fought for more than a decade to finally become the first practicing Jewish member of parliament in Britain. That was a massive breakthrough. The family also played a really significant and, a complex role in Jewish history. Baron Edmund de Rothschild was a key funder for many of the first Jewish farming settlements in what was then Ottoman Palestine. And years later, the famous Balfour Declaration, Britain's statement supporting a Jewish national home, that letter was addressed personally to a member of the family, Lord Walter Rothschild.
But nothing lasts forever, right? The world that the Rothschilds had mastered began to change in a big way. And as the 20th century rolled in, their story had to evolve with it.
Take a look at this. This table shows the profits of major British banks during World War I. Just compare the Rothschilds' numbers to these new giants that were cropping up, like Midland Bank. You can see what's happening. The whole financial world was shifting. Huge publicly owned banks were on the rise, and the sheer scale of money needed for 20th century economies meant that the old model of a private family bank just wasn't as dominant as it used to be.
And that brings us full circle, right back to the myths. So what's the reality? The Rothschilds were never some secret cabal controlling the world from a dark room. They were a family of brilliant financial pioneers who completely changed the game in the 19th century. Today, the firms that carry their name are still highly respected, especially in financial advisory. But they're players in a world filled with giants. They're not the all-powerful entity of the legends.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it. This whole incredible journey started at a small shop in that Frankfurt ghetto. The name itself, Rothschild, just comes from the German for red shield, Rothenschild, which was the sign hanging outside their house. And today, it continues from sleek, modern headquarters in the heart of London. It's really a story of an unbelievable rise and constant evolution.
So we're left with this question. How does a family name become a global myth? And what does that tell us about ourselves, about our endless fascination with wealth and power? The real story of the Rothschilds is incredible enough. It's about innovation, strategy, and survival. But the myth, that points to something deeper inside all of us. Those anxieties we have about how money really works and who's pulling the levers of power. Maybe the most lasting thing the Rothschilds built wasn't a bank or a vineyard, but the powerful legend that their very real story created,